Say, here, this is real estate. Right? How can this chart go like this? Why can't it go back like that? You know, but they didn't program that into their models. You know, it was just always like this. So, you know, but in a real world where they didn't have this cheap money, it wouldn't have happened. And of course, if we didn't have, one of the reasons that there was so much demand for higher yielding assets, regardless of risk, is because government took the risk-free rate down so low that everybody was searching for yield. And people, you know, they didn't care about the risk because they knew that they couldn't live on the puny yields that were available. So the government pushed everybody out onto the risk curve. Unfortunately, a lot of people didn't realize that they were taking as much risk as they were. Yeah.
I'm curious, what is your outlook on Japan? They seem to have a much bigger problem than we have. They have a much bigger national debt, and they are also keeping their interest rate low forever. So what lessons can we learn from Japan? What do you think can happen?
I don't think they have a bigger problem than we do. And I think that the main reason that Japan is keeping their rates so low is to keep the dollar propped up. I think the Japanese realize that if they were to raise rates significantly, the dollar would crash. And that's what they should do. I mean, part of Japan's problem is the rates are too low. They need rates to go up. But the reason that big debts are not a problem, as big a problem for Japan, is because while the Japanese government has big debts, Japanese citizens have a lot of savings. And so Japan is not borrowing from other countries. The Japanese government is borrowing from the Japanese people. Now, I think the Japanese people would be better off if that wasn't happening, but it's not unsustainable, at least not yet. Meanwhile, the Japanese are still a leading manufacturer and exporter. They have a trade surplus and a current account surplus. So I think their problems are much smaller than ours, but they still exist. But America is kind of unique in the fact that our economy is totally dependent on global charity. And our economy evolved in this way because the dollar was the reserve currency. The Japanese yen was not. So, you know, we were given a blank checkbook. We were able to, you know, print money and exchange it for real stuff. And so we were given all this rope, and we promptly hung ourselves with it. But no other nation in the world had all that rope. And so we were able to do a lot more damage to our economy. Any other country would have been, you know, if you're looking at somebody drinking alcohol, you know, any other country would have been cut off long ago. But because the dollar was the reserve currency, nobody cut us off yet. Yeah.
So what's your view on the future of trade policy? Are they concerned about new protectionist trade measures?
Well, I don't think so, because I mean, how are we going to fight a trade war? I mean, you know, we would lose. We're unarmed. If we put imports on duties, it's just going to hurt us. We're going to tell people, you know, if you want to sell products here, we're going to make Americans pay more for them. And it's not. I don't think that our politicians are going to do that, because you would immediately just increase prices for Americans. What trade policy should be, of course, is free. We should have free trade. I would just unilaterally drop all of our trade barriers. I wouldn't even care about negotiating. I know that the best thing for Americans is no trade, no tariffs. But the problem with international trade right now is we're not trading. We're just getting stuff. You know, the world is sending us stuff, and we're not trading anything. We're just giving them IOUs. So that has to change. The world is going to ultimately demand something for their stuff. They're not going to just take our paper. And that is when, again, our standard of living is going to have to decline dramatically, because it's a lot easier to print money than make stuff.
Could you explain why the free market is the best option with regards to ecological and environmental sustainability?
Well, for environmental policy? Well, I think in general, you're going to have certain externalities associated with, if I create pollution, theoretically, I can dump my waste in a river, and it's going to be a problem for somebody down the river, and it's not necessarily a problem for me. The question is, how best should society regulate those types of externalities? Should it be done, beforehand through the government, or should it be done, or even after the fact, through the court system, where the person who is now having to suffer for the pollution, individually filing a lawsuit against the polluter. I mean, personally, when it comes to certain externalities, I think it makes sense to have regulations rather than trying to settle everything through damages through a court system. But I don't think, in general, it should be on a national level, unless the states are not able to do it. If you have pollution moving across state lines or some reason. But I do believe that in certain circumstances, in those cases, that there are ways in which government can become involved to have a more efficient, way to rein those externalities in than simply waiting for somebody to be damaged and then sue, and having simply the threat of a lawsuit. I can simply fear a lawsuit. I cannot pollute knowing that you're going to sue me. Or there could be some regulations put in advance to say, look, you can't do this, and then of course, if you do pollute, then the government comes in. But I'm not necessarily opposed to that. I'm not really sure what's the most efficient way to do it. But in most cases, for most things, if you want to get low prices and high quality, that comes from the market. It never comes from the government. Since one of the things that's been coming up recently quite a bit, maybe it's good to talk about it since you guys are all students, is education. Education is a perfect example of where the government gets involved and drives the prices through the roof. I mean, the government gets involved in the education process because college tuition is so expensive. And so politicians get elected by promising more aid for education. And then the students and the students' parents will vote for those politicians because they say, well, college is so expensive, I need that aid. And so I'm going to vote for whatever politician is going to help more student loans and more programs. But no one stops to realize that the only reason college is so expensive in the first place is because of all those government programs. That without the programs, people wouldn't need the loans. People wouldn't need the scholarships or because they could afford to go. But the government comes in. I mean, normally markets drive prices down. You think, why is tuition at universities higher today? I just recently I did record a video blog, and I looked at the tuitions at Yale in the past, and I noticed that for the first 45 years that Yale charged tuition, it was the exact same price. It was $33 a year, and it never went up for 40. And then it went up a little bit, but by 1870 or something, it had gone up to about $140 a year. And then 45 years later, it got to 160. So it took like 45 more years to go up 15%. Right? Now, of course, the tuition was like $35,000. It's gone up, 100 times. It only tripled in the 19th century, and it's gone up 100 times in the 20th century. So what happened? What changed? Right? Why were tuitions so stable, and now they're going through the roof? The only thing that changed is the government tried to make them affordable. And it drove it through the roof. Because what does the government do? The government gives kids money to go to school. And so what do? They build up the price. The government makes it so you can go to a bank and borrow as much money as you want to go to school. So you have an unlimited amount of money to bid up prices. So all the students are competing with everybody with government money to see who can pay the most. And the colleges say, this is a great deal for us, so every year they jack tuitions up. And that's why they do it every year. We just raise our price. College tuitions are actually up about 7% this year in the biggest recession since the Great Depression, and they're still rising. How can that be? Government, that's why. The Federal Reserve buying up all those student loans. I mean, I think about it. How many people in this room who are in school, if they couldn't get any money, if they couldn't borrow any money, how many people can actually afford to go to school? If you can afford it, raise your hand without a loan. I said nobody, one guy in the back. So what do you think would happen if all of a sudden, the only reason you can get loans is because the government guarantees them. Otherwise, nobody would be dumb enough to make the loans. And if they did, the rates would be so high you wouldn't want to borrow. So no one in this room would be going to school. So if I stop those government loans tomorrow, right? All of a sudden, the universities, no one's going to apply.